and welcome back to Voices of Fris. In this third episode of Talks from World Assembly 2023, we're hearing about Sara's story. Sara Børty shares about her experience of pioneering student ministry in Greenland. It's a very touching story of working through disappointment and frustration and seeing how God blesses faithful obedience even if it's not in the way we're expecting.
Hi everyone, it's good to be here. My name is Sara Børty, and for the last 4 years, I have lived in Greenland's capital, Nuuk, to pioneer a student ministry sent out from the Danish movement. I moved to Nuuk with my husband in summer 2019, and I went there to work full-time to start up a student ministry as the first one there. And my husband got a secular job and was on a job mission, and therefore a volunteer and indispensable support for me in the work. Together with various helpers, we have tried to work out what student work might look like in Greenland. And now, after 4 years, we are 2 sons richer, and we have chosen to move back to Denmark to be closer to family. But Greenland is and will always be in our hearts, and we got a home in Greenland now too. I experienced a very strong call to go to Greenland, and we prepared for it a couple of years ahead of it. But although we have been faithful in our service and in our calling to Greenland, we have not had the feeling that everything we did was successful for us. We prayed a lot before going to Greenland. We prayed a lot while we were there. We prayed a lot for the activities we were doing. But we found out that the amount of prayer and the number of preparations we did not make the outcome of how well the activity went or how many people would show up. Before we went to Greenland, we imagined how far we could go in the first years, and how many numbers of groups we would have, and how many schools we would be present at. But doors were closed, and the students was much more difficult to engage in our work than we had expected. Also, the cultural gap that we had to cross was much deeper than we thought, and it took great effort to put aside our Danish methods and mindset and meet the Greenlanders in their culture. And this we made some progress in, but are by no means finished with yet. But I'm so happy that KFS, who sent us to Greenland, in their vision for Greenland was thinking long term, and they pointed to the word patience. As it says here in Psalm 1, verses 3, "He is like a tree planted by streams of water and yields fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither. In all that he does, he prospers." This is a beautiful verse, but this is not how we look back on our work. And maybe none of us in here, or maybe just the pioneers in here, does not look back on our work in this way. My experience is that it can be hard to follow God's plans and try to understand what his will is. But all this does not mean that we did not feel that God used what we did, or that we did not feel blessed in the work. Because we did, but just in a different way than expected. Perhaps it was precisely there, when it didn't turn out as I had expected, that I experienced being blessed in our obedience. We have been persistent and continued, even when it has looked like we were getting nowhere. And then we have experienced the meaning of our work in a completely different way than we had imagined. As much as I would like to count the number of people who showed up, or the number of activities, or the number of schools we were present at, we found that we could never live up to our own expectations. But when we got together, the leaders, and talked after our meetings, we experienced the importance of the conversations we have had with the few who had turned up that night. Not one person has turned up at a KFS meeting in Greenland without one of us leaders having a chat with them. So few came that we could be sure that we got to greet everyone and that everyone got a meeting with our KFS. So maybe only 2 people came that night, but then we had time to talk for a long time. And we experienced how much there was a need for us to sit right there, and how good it was that 20 didn't come, because then we wouldn't have had the time to sit there. And when Corona hit the world, the politicians in Greenland chose to shut down all entry and exit to Greenland for several months and over several rounds. All schools closed the door to anyone who was not a teacher or student, and we couldn't gather more than a handful. So that meant that we couldn't have any of our KFS meetings. There was a lot that was frustrating in that time, and especially for us doing a pioneer work. So there were a lot of closed doors, but God opened other doors. Just before Corona came, I agreed that I should preach in the city's apostolic church, but instead they made a radio transmitted sermon. And I was allowed to give my sermon to listeners all over Greenland. And afterwards, someone wrote and asked if they could join our IFEs. It gave us the idea to start doing regular radio shows, because maybe there were more listeners out there who we wouldn't otherwise meet. And among the students at the university, I had finally found several who wanted to join a group. But now we could not meet at the university anymore. Instead, one of the girls opened her home, and we could meet at her home, even though she herself had plenty to fight with. For her, it was so important that we continued the group that she willingly put herself aside. In those things, we have seen small blessings in midst of all the closed doors. Looking back, we can see how God is making a way for this student ministry in His own way. Another example, we have always had the fear that we would have to stand alone in the work, or that it would depend too much on us. But we have never been alone. Although we planned to travel to Greenland with some others, which did not work out, God sent others to help us as we arrived. And now with our farewell, we searched for a replacement, and it wasn't easy to find. But we succeeded, and maybe it wasn't how we or KFS Denmark thought it would look, but we experienced again and again that the work is carried on, and the seeds that we have planted will just as slowly grow. We have taken many steps in faith, and we have walked in discipleship with maybe just a few Greenlanders. And now we can just pray and hope that one day they can pass on what we have taught them, and they can gather perhaps even more people, as in that way the Christian message can be spread in the student world in Greenland. We do not know what God's plans are, and that is probably the most difficult part of this work. We want to hold on to His word and His will, but we do not know what His methods are. But I'm very happy and proud to have been allowed to be in this service and to let myself be used, even if it has not worked out many times. I believe that God has blessed us in the work we have done in our obedience, faithfulness, and patience. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to this talk. We've got a new one dropping every Wednesday, and if you're loving what you hear, show us some love by subscribing and liking the podcast. And don't forget to stay connected with us on all social media platforms, including WhatsApp at IFES World.